I constantly go through phases in cooking where I get really excited about one particular style or element or ingredient of cooking where I just obsess over it for months. That can be anything from Japanese or Indian food to frying chicken to home brewing, fermenting, baking, but one constantly keeps coming back. Year after year, I get this itch to make lots of ice cream. I don't have a particular sweet tooth, I'm not super into desserts generally, but there's something about ice cream that just does it for me. So this year, when I got the itch to make ice cream, I decided to take a step back and see if I couldn't make my base better. I've been using this base recipe, I don't know where I got it, but I've been using it year after year for almost a decade now. And I wanted to see if I could tear it apart and make something newer, better, and more delicious. I've learned a lot about ice cream in that time, but I haven't really applied it to my own recipes. So what I want to do is take my base recipe, I'll make just a standard milk custard base, tear apart each component of it, and build it back from scratch. So let's start by just making that base ice cream. So first we're going to build our wet mix by combining 400 grams of milk and 400 grams of cream. Then we're going to bring that up to temp over a medium-low flame. Then in another container, we're going to combine 120 grams of sugar, just plain cane sugar, with a pinch of salt and 6 egg yolks. So this is where our mixture gets a little bit weird. We're doing this because we're going to need to temper the egg yolks before they get into the hot milk, because otherwise they'll curdle and you'll get scrambled eggs in your ice cream, which is never fun. Then we just need to whisk the eggs and sugar together until it's a nice homogeneous mixture. Just above 170, so now we're gonna take our egg mixture and scoop just a little bit of our milk mixture in. Whisk that together as fast as we can. This is called tempering the eggs and prevents them from curdling. We'll do that a couple more times just to make sure that it's up to temp. And then we'll pour that back into our milk mixture. Once the mix is nice and smooth and coats the back of the spoon, we're going to pour it off into a container to age. Basically, we want the ice cream temperature to drop as close to the freezing point as possible without passing it. So the temperature of a refrigerator at about 40 degrees Fahrenheit is perfect. Once your ice cream is down to temp and it's had a chance to really age, we'll pour that into a pre-chilled ice cream churn. When the ice cream maker starts to struggle, we just scoop it out and put it in the freezer to chill for 4 hours. So this is my tried and true recipe. I've been using this one on and off for almost a decade now. We've gone through a lot of ups and downs, but there are a lot of good things about this ice cream. It's a very standard French custard style ice cream, which is a really nice decadent dessert. But it also is very egg forward. It definitely is like whatever your flavor is and egg. We can work on that. There's also a little bit of a gritty texture to it. I like a little bit of grit from Overrun, which kind of provides like a dry, like open texture. I really like that. I don't like large ice crystals. That just detracts from the smoothness, and that's not great. So we've got 3 basic factors to look at here. We've got the fat, the sweetener, and the stabilizer. So let's start from scratch, break down each factor, explore all of our options for each component, and then come back with a better ice cream. Now, to make our comparisons fair, we need to remove some variables from the equation. First, we've got a problem of distributing things equally. We've got several powders that quickly become coagulated with a liquid. So we want to make sure that those are distributed super evenly. So we're going to do dry mixes and wet mixes, and to combine them, we're going to use a high-powered blender. The second thing we want more control of is evaporation. In the stovetop method we used for the first batch, we basically ended up reducing the total amount of the mixture by 200 grams, or about a fifth of the total mixture. That's a huge amount, and it's not super controllable. We could easily have one batch reduced by 100 grams or one reduced by 300 grams. So we really want to make sure that we keep a consistent baseline there. To control our evaporation, we're going to use an immersion circulator. We're going to cook each of our batters sous vide so that we can completely remove evaporation from the equation. We're going to cook each batter in a vacuum sealed bag at 170 degrees for an hour. Each one will get the exact same amount of heat, have zero evaporation, and we can simulate the evaporation from the first batch by reducing the milk in the mixture by 200 grams. Our original recipe has 3 sources of fat. We've got egg yolks at about 66% fat. We've got cream at about 40% fat, and we've got milk at about 4% fat. We can't easily adjust the eggs because they're also our emulsifier and stabilizer. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna shift to have an all cream batch and an all milk batch. So we'll take 600 grams of milk, because again, we reduced our liquid by 200 grams. Add our egg yolks. We'll mix that together on low speed. We just want to build a vortex. Then we'll mix our sugar and our salt together to make our dry mix. We'll open the hole in the lid, and we'll basically just pour that directly into the vortex. That should distribute the powder evenly, prevent it from clumping. Then we're gonna turn it up to max. Just for a few seconds. Then we're gonna pour this mixture out of the blender into a vacuum seal bag. We'll just seal that and set it aside. We're gonna do the exact same for the cream, except with 600 grams of cream instead of 600 grams of milk. So here's our fat gradient. Over here, we have our milk at 4% fat. Here, we have our standard recipe at 22% fat, and here we have our cream at almost 40% fat. Pretty big difference overall, I'd say. The cream is like very clearly buttery, while the milk is basically a milk slushy. So, while milk slushy sounds very appetizing, I'm a little not looking forward to this one. That's so awful. It's so bad. Like it's like there are pieces of cold butter suspended in just pure water. It's really awful. It's very confusing in your mouth. The OG we've already tried. It's pretty luscious. Let's give that a little support. How that turns into that is beyond me, to be honest. Chemistry, am I right? All right, and then down here on the end, this scoops super easily. Look how soft that is. It's still very eggy, but the main flavor you get, it tastes like I just ate a stick of butter. Like, no joke. It's extremely buttery. This is definitely a pleasant texture, but when you're done, it kind of leaves your mouth coated, which is unpleasant. It's kind of cloying. All right, so I think I would end up just on the cream side of the spectrum. But I think we're in a good place. I think we've got a lot of exploring to do on the other two factors. So let's get on to sugars. For our sweeteners, the first half of our recipe won't really change much. We'll be adding 200 grams of milk and 400 grams of cream in each case. We'll also be adding our 6 egg yolks, just as before, and we'll blend those together and add the dry mix later. The dry mix is obviously where it gets interesting because we're gonna replace our sucrose wholesale with 2 different sugars. First, we're gonna use dextrose. Now, dextrose is a powdered sugar similar to cane sugar, but it is about 3/4 as sweet, so significantly less sugar flavor. but it depresses the freezing temperature of water significantly. So we're actually gonna get smaller crystals in our ice cream. We'll mix that with our salt, turn on our blender to get a vortex going, and then pour it in. Once that's evenly mixed, we'll pour it off into a vacuum sealed bag. Our second batch is just the same. Milk, cream, and eggs. Here's where it differs. We don't actually have a dry sugar, so we're actually going to have to scrape out our glucose into the wet mix. Now the other thing about glucose is it's the biggest pain in the ass in the world to use. It is super, super sticky and super, super thick. It's very unfriendly to use. Do not recommend, 0 stars. And since we don't have much dry mix to distribute, we'll just put it right in. All right, so now we have our sugars up. First up, we have our glucose. Second, OG recipe. Third, dextrose. Now, there's already a very clear resemblance to the milks here. I assume because of glucose's high water content, we're seeing a bit of the slushy effect. And over here, because of dextrose's frost point depression, we end up with kind of a creamy look to it. So let's give it a quick test. This is pieces. It's more pleasant than the milk one, but not by much. Because of glucose and dextrose's relatively low sweetness, it just doesn't taste like much. It tastes like milk, but very cold. It doesn't taste like sweeter or anything. And there's definitely some like egg, and there's some weird textural stuff going on there where it's like, it comes apart in chunks. Generally an unpleasant eating experience. Dextrose, on the other hand, really comes apart smooth, just like our cream did, interestingly. Noticeably sweeter. Dextrose and glucose are almost identical chemically, but we're using a glucose syrup versus powdered glucose, so there's just so much less sugar per any amount of volume that we're definitely getting a lot less sweetness here than we are here, even though they were a total volume match. And then our OG for comparison, because why I turned down another scoop of ice cream. The texture on the dextrose is better, and the sweetness is maybe a little better too. I think I'd probably go somewhere between these two is where I would want to end up, because the balance of like less sugar flavor in the dextrose along with the creamier texture seems like a better long-term position to be. All right, next up, stabilizers. Our first stabilizer, gelatin. It's a staple of the genre. Anytime you want to make water thick, gelatin's a great first choice. But if we put this into our batter right away, we'll end up with something that's kind of stringy and gross. So first, we need to bloom it by submerging it in cold water until it gets soft and gooey. After about 5 minutes, our gelatin is nice and gooey and soft. Now we can add it to our batter. So now this one's real simple. We just add in our cream and our milk, just as before. And this time, instead of eggs, we just add in our gelatin. We'll get our vortex going and add in our sugar and salt. Our final thickener is more like what you would see in a grocery store ice cream, like something commercially processed, because we're gonna use gums. Now this is actually a 3-part mix, and we're gonna use LBG, or Luth Bader Ginsburg. It's a locust bean gum. Guar gum, which locust bean gum and guar gum both have similar properties, but guar and locust bean gum actually work together to make each other stronger. So we can use less of the total mix by having both of them in there. And then finally, lambda carrageenan. Now there's a reason that there's 3 parts. Lambda carrageenan makes the liquid part of ice cream feel custardy and like eggy. It brings in that texture without actually introducing egg flavor. So we end up with a nicer end product. The locust bean gum, on the other hand, really makes the frozen phase a bit more stable, and it resists melting, but as soon as you cut into it with your teeth or a spoon, the shear force just breaks it apart, and you end up with like a nice milky, creamy breakage instead of like crystals. So it ends up giving it a great texture. That's why you see it in grocery store ice creams. So we're gonna use absolutely tiny amounts of these gums. So we need a particularly small scale. This works down to 1/10 of a gram. So we're gonna use 0.8 grams of locust bean gum, 0.4 grams of guar gum, and 0.2 grams of lambda carrageenan. So now we'll take our gums and we're just gonna add them right into our salt. Make sure to spill as much as possible. And then we'll just combine everything as usual. All right, so now we have our stabilizers. First off, we have gelatin. Second is our egg, very clearly more yellow than the other two. And finally, our gums. As a reminder, that's locust bean gum, guar gum, and lambda carrageenan. So let's give this a test. It comes apart kind of crumbly, the gelatin does. It does taste nice though. It tastes very straight up milk. You get a little bit of sugar still, but it's very milk centric flavor wise. Give the gums a test. A bit creamier texture. It almost has like a foamy look to it, which is, I don't know how to think about that. The foaminess carries over to the texture as well. But it's not entirely unpleasant. It just feels like it needs more balance. You cannot taste anything about the gum or the gelatin, but the texture of the gum is so much closer to being desirable in any way that I think I would lean towards that. As a quick test, let's try our OG. All you can taste is egg after you try these other ones. It's like an egg tart, which is a good thing, but not really what I want my strawberry to taste like. Okay, I think I'm gonna end up somewhere between the existing custard base and the gum base. Okay, I think we're ready to start building our new recipe. So now we've explored just how each factor affects the final composition, let's start to reformulate our recipe. For our wet mix, I think we're gonna go 3 parts cream to 1 part milk. That'll give us a nice butter, fat, heavy, like rich experience without the intense crystallization of the milk mix. For our final part of the wet mix, we'll keep 3 eggs instead of 6. That'll give us a nice custardy texture without the intense egginess. All right, so now for our dry mix, we're gonna use 2/3 sucrose to 1/3 dextrose. We're also going to add our gum mixture, same ratio as before. That'll work nicely together with the eggs to build a nice emulsified, thickened end result. It'll be really rich, somewhat dense, but not too like intensely claggy. All right, now we've got it nice and distributed. We're not gonna do sous vide again. Sous vide is not an ideal way to actually cook the ice cream. It's just a nice way to make a direct comparison. So we're gonna go back to the stovetop so we can control that evaporation. So we're gonna cook it just like before. We're gonna get it up to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the temperature at which whey protein denatures, and then we'll hold it there until it gets nice and thick and glossy, just like before. After a quick churn, we'll throw it into our freezer for at least 4 hours to solidify. This turned out great. I'm very pleased with this. It's much lighter in color, obviously due to the halving of the eggs, and it has this beautiful texture to it that's a cross between the egg and the gum, as you might expect. It's got some of the airiness of the egg custard, but with the super tiny crystal size of the gum. I'm very proud of this one. This is definitely my new recipe. This is my go-to. And I think that the best way to show you what it's capable of is not necessarily to sit here with an ice cream cone, but to start building some new flavors with it. So I think we should really try adapting this recipe to 3 of the most popular flavors, at least where I live, which are vanilla, strawberry, and chocolate. So for our vanilla, we've got the same dry mix, we've got the same wet mix, but the one thing we're gonna change is we're gonna add some vanilla bean seeds to the blender and 5 grams of vanilla extract. Now we'll just cook this on the stove top just like we did before, but we'll add in the rest of the vanilla pod. There's a lot of flavor in there that we weren't able to get out, whether that's more vanilla seeds or there's just flavors in the skin itself, but we don't wanna necessarily like tear the fibers up and distribute it in the ice cream. So we're gonna cook this on the stove top, add this in, and we'll pull this out right before we churn the ice cream. All right, so our chocolate is super simple as well. We're just adding cocoa powder to our dry mix. In this case, this is Dutch processed cocoa powder, which means that alkali is applied to it. Because cocoa powder is naturally acidic, this will reduce the bitterness in our final result. So we'll end up with a much nicer, more milk chocolatey flavor. All right, our final ice cream is by far the most difficult to modify the base recipe to accommodate because we're talking strawberries, and these have a ton of liquid and they bring their own sugar to the party too. So we need to extract as much liquid as we can because that is flavor and we do want to use that, but we don't want a bunch of little strawberry shaped ice cubes in our ice cream. So we're just going to get 400 grams of strawberries, and then we're gonna add our sugars to this mix. We're adding additional dextrose here. So even though it's gonna be a little bit of sugar coming from the strawberries, we also want the crystal suppression of the dextrose. So we're gonna macerate it with all of our sugars, just mix it together, and then we're gonna let it sit for about an hour to release all of its liquid. All right, so now we've released quite a bit of juice from these strawberries. We can start to strain that off, but first we have a little bit of a complication because strawberry juice doesn't have a ton of flavor or color to distribute into the ice cream, and we need a bright pink ice cream that tastes a lot like strawberry. So we're gonna use freeze-dried strawberries. These things are extremely concentrated strawberry flavor, but we need to powder them first. We can't just have distributed freeze-dried strawberries. So we're gonna put them into the blender first. So usually we do our dry mix last. This time we're gonna start with this. Now that's very quickly going to begin to clump together. So we're gonna keep it on low. It's gonna start producing a lot of like strawberry smoke. So we need to pour in a liquid really fast to get it to like kind of way down. So we're gonna build a paste out of strawberry and cream basically. Then we'll add the rest of our wet mix and the juice from our strawberries. Get a vortex going, then add in our gums and our salt. Turn the blender up, get it distributed. Then we'll turn that off and get it onto the stove as quickly as possible so it doesn't set. These are my rapidly melting, perfect ice creams. These are so delicious. Like, look at these textures. They're rapidly dripping onto the counter, but I don't think that should detract from the quality of the ice cream. These are fantastic, but since they're rapidly melting, let's get to them really quickly. Let's move these off to the side here. Start with vanilla. The vanilla is extremely round. It's not like a thin vanilla extract flavor. It's super clean. It has the texture that is exactly that custardy, thick texture, but it doesn't taste at all like egg. It's extremely vanilla only. It is just that flavor, nothing else. This is the vanilla I dream of. It's rich and caramely, it's round, it's not that like vanilla extract flavor. We have some vanilla extract in there, of course, but the vanilla bean flavor overwhelms it completely. It's playing a supporting role in this case. This is excellent, and you should make it. Next up, let's go chocolate. Also rapidly dripping, but you can see that the drippiness is, it's very creamy. It's not watery like if the gum had just released itself. That's that lambda carrageenan at work. We see these rivulets that are from the overrun, where the ice cream churn with a lot of air into the ice cream base. So we get these nice classic ice cream kind of crags. Again, you can see just how like it melts very creamily. This looks like an egg custard ice cream. There's nothing to me here that says this is gum, except for that it is a perfectly chocolate flavor. It is fudgy. It's like a brownie made of ice cream. So good. And all it took was a little bit of cocoa powder. So I'm pretty ecstatic about this one and how it turned out. And last but not least, my favorite and my white whale strawberry. Now this is not the brightest pink I've ever seen. It's a little bit on the salmony side. It's like a little unsaturated, but let's see how it tastes. Not as melty as the others. I think that's due to the carrageenan being a smaller percentage of this one. And there just being more water to freeze into hard crystals. So there is a bit more of a grit to this one, but it is intensely strawberry flavored. There's no hint of egg. It tastes like a fresh strawberry. Like if you had told me this was only fresh strawberries, I would fully believe you. And I think the freeze-dried strawberries, which were probably dried at like the peak of their ripeness, played a key role in that. So even if it's out of season, if you're in a place that doesn't grow strawberries, this is fully doable. These ice creams are fantastic and you should go make them. I'll put up these recipes as well as all my other favorites, the blueberry habanero, the peanut butter, the black sesame, up on kitchenomicon.com. Link in the description below. I'm gonna go attend to some ice cream. Go conjure up something delicious. I'll see you later.